I think there's a great sense of irony with this video and this pen. The Chinese pen market, best known for cloning Western pens, now suffers from the exact same thing. Chinese pens are now being cloned by other pen brands and being sold at, believe it or not, even cheaper prices. The eBay sellers that sell this pen would have you think that Moonman now offer the M2, a top 10 Chinese pen in my book, with a blue ring, and they've also slashed the price from $10 to $15 to around $4 or $5. But take a closer look and there's a little bit more going on. Not only is this not a Moonman M2, it's not even made by Moonman the brand. Now that might have you think that someone has gotten a hold of the equipment and the data used to make the M2 and is making their own clone, like how Parker left some molds in China and the molds were then used to make fake Parker pens. But take a closer look and it shows that this pen is actually constructed entirely differently. The Moonman M2 is made from turned acrylic on a lathe, but the clone is made by a brand called HYL, and it's an injection molded pen with clear markings showing that. From a distance, and even if you had the pens next to each other and you weren't paying all that much attention, you would think that these pens are identical. The differences are really subtle and they don't really impact the really great ergonomics of the M2 design, which were always great, which is one reason why it was and still is a great EDC pen. The pens are the same width, the same length, and the clone is only about 1 gram lighter. The lightness of the clone is explained by the ink chamber, which now runs the full length of the barrel. This is because injection molding allows for this. The drilled internals of the Moonman M2 forces the ink chamber to stop around about 20mm earlier. Also, for some reason, there are these flat facets on the internal sidewalls of the taper of the barrel and the cap, which is a design choice which I do not like. The build quality though is okay, with the exception of what I'm guessing is a manufacturing issue with the barrel. The internal hole is way off to one side on an angle, and that's something that I've seen on pretty much every one of these cloned pens, which doesn't look all that nice. In everyday use, this issue probably won't impact the experience, but if the pen ever cracks, it's probably going to be here, because the thickness of the sidewall is very thin. Now moving on to the nib, this pen uses the same nib, feed and section as Moonman M2. They didn't copy it. It's actually a brought in component from an OEM who actually makes most of the nibs found on Chinese pens. I should know I've actually spoken to this company in the past. This company makes the screw-in section, or in this case the entire section, and the company then builds the pen to fit it. That's how you see the same section on different pens from different brands. The performance of the nib is therefore identical to the M2, and that is a really good thing. It's a very smooth nib, it flows very well, and it has a little bit of spring to it. Those are the things that make it perfect as an EDC nib. That's one reason why the M2 is such a highly rated pen for me, and that's why I found it very difficult to come to a solid conclusion for this pen. Yes, it has a slight manufacturing defect, but in every other way, it essentially is a Moonman M2. It even uses the same nib and offers the exact same writing experience. At less than half the cost of the M2, this is a very easy sell, but the question is, what would I buy? Well, personally, if I was serious at using this pen as an EDC, the Moonman M2, the original one, clearly is the better choice. Acrylic is always slightly stronger when it's cast then turned than if it is extruded in a mold, so the M2 would be slightly stronger and more durable. Plus the internals, which are turned and bored, look a little bit nicer, with the taper being solid and filled. But if you're looking at this pen just for a little bit of fun, just to play around with, I think the HYL M2 is a fine option. You really won't be missing out on all that much. Hello everyone, welcome to the writing sample for the HYL M2. This has the fine nib on it, whereas my Moonman M2 has an extra fine. The ink that I'm just using is Mont Blanc's Black. This is the ISO ink. The paper that I'm using is Clairefontaine. Nothing special. Quick writing sample. And as you can see, no dramas whatsoever. That's what you want from an EDC pen. Very nice, very smooth. In everyday writing, there's not that much line variation. There's not much in terms of the grinding, but if you do slow down a little bit, you can probably push a little bit more. Yeah, there's a little bit of contrast that you can get from it, but overall, with an EDC nib, it doesn't really matter that much. That being said, whilst there's not much contrast between thick and thin lines, there is a little bit of bounce from the nib, which is really nice. In terms of fast writing, there's no issues at all with fast writing. As I've said, the feed in it is very, very consistent. It's a very good feed. In terms of wetness, it's what you would expect from an Asian fine style nib. Maybe even a little bit wetter, though I have just inked up this pen, so there might be a little bit more ink in the feed. In terms of grinding of the nib, no flex and flex. So there is a little bit of contrast, but overall you don't really need all that much flex from an everyday carrying nib. So no pressure and as much pressure as possible. In terms of grinding, it really is smooth. It's very, very smooth. Some pens from China really have a sweet spot that you need to hit. With this pen, you can write at it from pretty much any angle and it's going to write very, very smoothly. I really like the company that makes these specific nibs. They do a very good job with grinding.